Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to also contribute to this motion. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I stand to support the bipartisan approach that has been adopted by the majority side and the minority. So I want to thank Senator Cheruiyot, our youthful leader, majority leader from the majority side, and our elder, Justice Retired Stuart Mazayo, who under the leadership of Senator Wambua have brought us together to have a discourse as Kenyans. We thank you, our dear colleagues. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I first want to pass my message of condolences to the mothers, the fathers, brothers and sisters of the 34, I'm told now it's 34, Kenyans who lost their lives during these demonstrations. Mr. Speaker, as a father, as a son to a mother, it's a painful thing to lose a son or a daughter, especially one who has given himself or herself to fight for a just cause, to make this country better, Mr. Speaker. These fallen heroes, Mr. Speaker, were motivated by one desire to improve the landscape of our governance. They wanted to make the lives of many of us better, Mr. Speaker. And there are many of us, Mr. Speaker, who have benefited from this very courageous Gen Z generation that put the government on toes by the demonstration. Mr. Speaker, as a lawyer, I know that the right to picket, the right to demonstrate, the right to withdraw support from a government is enshrined in our Constitution, as long as it's peaceful and geared to passing a message to the government of the day. So it's something that, Mr. Speaker, we cannot fail to acknowledge that the Gen Zs have a right, Mr. Speaker, to picket, to demonstrate. And world all over, Mr. Speaker, we know that there are people who have led peaceful protests and they have changed the world, Mr. Speaker. We know, Mr. Speaker, that in 1964, the celebrated Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in the United States of America led the march to Washington that led to the enactment of the Civil Rights Act in the United States of America that gave Americans their civil rights, Mr. Speaker. So we regret, Mr. Speaker, that there are Kenyans, I'm told about 8 of them, who lost their lives within the precincts of Parliament. That is regrettable, Mr. Speaker, and it's my prayer and wish, Mr. Speaker, that as we move forward, we also demand for accountability from our security forces, Mr. Speaker. We know that a well-trained police force that follows what Kenyans passed when we enacted the 2010 Constitution, in Chapter 14, they know that they are supposed to be guided by principles of human rights, rule of law, democracy, Mr. Speaker. And the rule of law, Mr. Speaker, dictates that if you come across a demonstrator who has broken the law, what we expect as a country is to have that Kenyan arrested and presented before courts of law. That's the only way, Mr. Speaker, we can build a country that truly can pride itself as one that respects and operates within the tenets of the rule of law, Mr. Speaker. We watch international media. We see demonstrations every day. You see them in France, you see them in the United States, we see them in Britain, but hardly will you see cases where police officers will open fire on unarmed demonstrators. We expect, Mr. Speaker, that one of the resolutions we'll make as a committee is to hold accountable the police officers who may have used excessive force. So I mourn with those Kenyans, and I plead that part of the recommendations, Mr. Speaker, should be how we extend assistance to the parents of these children who have lost their loved ones as they prepare for their burial. I applaud the CS Health who released a press release today confirming that the government has waived all the medical bills for those Kenyans. So we must move a step further, Mr. Speaker, and ensure that we extend assistance. Mr. Speaker, this Gen Z, it is this Gen Z that we owe. We failed, me included, in stopping the passage of that very draconian finance bill. If it was not for this Gen Z, that finance bill would be low today. So we owe them. Without them, Senator Kalwale, finance bill 2024 would be low today. That is a reality, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we must also accept as a country that we are in extraordinary times, which calls for extraordinary measures from extraordinary leaders, Mr. Speaker. What we have seen is a Gen Z that has demonstrated extraordinary ability. How these young people are able to mobilize and be out in the streets without choosing your social status is amazing, Mr. Speaker. We have children who are in Gen Z generation, whom you may think as fairly privileged, but they identify with the cause of the Gen Z that is in the streets, Mr. Speaker. If you have a son, watch how they are hooked to this, it's called X-space conversations, Mr. Speaker. So it tells us, Mr. Speaker, that there is something that we have not done right, Mr. Speaker. I propose, Mr. Speaker, that as we go forward, Mr. Speaker, we must accept that this country is facing a number of challenges and we must look for solutions. Mr. Speaker, the first point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, and I want to speak to the President. The first point, Mr. Speaker, if the President needs to restore respectability, because the public trust on the presidency is at the lowest, Mr. Speaker. If you listen to the X-space, even when the President was answering questions, the responses were that we cannot trust him. So the biggest challenge for the President is to win back the public trust, Mr. Speaker. Public trust on the President is at its lowest, Mr. Speaker. So we urge the President to begin by respecting the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. Let him begin by respecting the Constitution. And Mr. Speaker, he can go for the low-hanging fruits. We have seen what this Gen Z generation has been posting on social media. The major attack is on how the President has exercised the power before. That is the problem. If we don't acknowledge that as a house, we will not be able to solve the challenges we are facing, Mr. Speaker. The feeling, Mr. Speaker, is that the President has not allowed Parliament, both the Senate and the National Assembly, to carry its duties as an independent institution, Mr. Speaker. Most of these unpopular legislations that triggered these demonstrations were pushed through the two houses. You know about the housing levy that led, it was called Affordable Housing Bill that created the now Affordable Housing Act. It was pushed through, Mr. Speaker. If we had adopted a bipartisan approach, we would have made that law less punitive to Kenyans. Because the cry, if you listen to the young professionals, the young doctors, the young lawyers, they are crying about an invasion on their payslip. Even those who work for Parliament, their cry is that they are facing a government that is raiding their pockets day in, day out. Their pocket was raided in the first budget. Their pocket has been raided in the second budget. Mr. Speaker, this issue of corruption, I want to join my colleague Senator Cheriot that we will not fix it unless we have a radical surgery on EACC, Mr. Speaker. And I will give you an example on what has happened in the county of Nyamira. Mr. Speaker, in the month of August 2022, while we are just in the run-up to the elections, the governor of Nyamira unilaterally paid himself to his account 6.573 million, Mr. Speaker. And I'm speaking here as a person who speaks the truth, and I want to table that payslip before the House. It's here. He paid himself 6.573 billion. A whistleblower, million. The payslip is here, and I beg to table, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when EACC was summoned to Nyamira, instead of recording a statement and taking that governor to court, they got money from him, and then they told him, we can agree, you just refunded the money quietly, Mr. Speaker. What a shame. What a shame, Mr. Speaker. How can that be from a body that is supposed to be fighting corruption, Mr. Speaker? What stops another officer in the county government of Nyamira paying himself, and then when EACC goes, they will say, but you did that to the governor. We also want a settlement, Mr. Speaker. This guy, Governor Amos Nyaribo, Mr. Speaker, should have been arrested, arraigned before a court of law, and a conviction given by the courts, Mr. Speaker. That's the only way you can send a message, Mr. Speaker, that you are intent in fighting corruption. Let me even shock you further, Mr. Speaker, because I've worked with the documents. There was another case, Mr. Speaker. Officers within the county government of Nyamira, Mr. Speaker, hatched a scheme to siphon money from the public coffers of the county government of Nyamira. And they came up with ghost names, whom up to today nobody knows, and they paid them a total of 800,000, Mr. Speaker. These guys were investigated for those offenses, charged with abuse of office. One, Godfrey Kiriago and Geoffrey Nyamagwa, Mr. Speaker, arrested, taken to court for that crime they committed, Mr. Speaker. Once the case was registered, and I have the charge sheet here, as criminal case E510 of 2023, Mr. Speaker, they had a secret meeting with the DPP, Mr. Speaker, and that case, Mr. Speaker, was withdrawn under Section 82(1) of the Criminal Procedure Code, Mr. Speaker. What a shame. Mr. Speaker, when the county government was being summoned to appear in Nairobi, they had the audacity to tell the committee of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, that they have taken action of relieving Mr. Kiriago from service at the county government of Nyamira and send him back to the national government so that he can continue with these fraudulent activities, Mr. Speaker. If this is the kind of conduct we are going to have from the office of EACC, from the office of the DPP, how will we ever fight corruption, Mr. Speaker? And I table this document, Mr. Speaker, before the House so that this conduct of EACC can be on the table. And Mr. Speaker, I'm of the view, Mr. Speaker, that if the Senate of the Republic of Kenya will find these documents to be genuine, then the commissioners at EACC and the CEO of EACC should be the first one to face the chop. Senator Cheruiyot, we cannot allow that kind of impunity. Mr. Speaker, just to tell you the kind of challenge this country is facing, if you read the auditor's report, Mr. Speaker, it tells you that the county government of Nyamira has exceeded Regulation 22 on personnel emoluments by 22%. It is at 57, and I have the document. And Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the people of Nyamira that if I've said a lie this afternoon, I'll go to Tinga, where I was born, in West Mogirango, Basamaro constituency, and tender my resignation. The documents I'm tendering before this House are authentic. They are from our public offices, from government offices, and just give a snippet of the kind of rot that we have, Mr. Speaker. Once this report was prepared by the Auditor General, and we got a qualified, audited accounts, Mr. Speaker, saying that our personnel emoluments were at 57%, the governor had the audacity, Mr. Speaker, of proceeding again to advertise and employ a further 200 workers, Meaning, next time the auditors go to Nyamira, it will be at 60-something%. What kind of impunity is this, Mr. Speaker? And I table this report before the Senate. Mr. Speaker, this kind of rot is not just happening in the county government of Nyamira. It's replicated at the national government, Mr. Speaker. The position of CAS, and this, we're having a conversation, Mr. Speaker, the positions of cabinet administrative secretaries are unconstitutional. The GenZs have told us that those positions should not even exist, Mr. Speaker. But I have information, Mr. Speaker, that the head of public service, Felix Kosgei, has already written, and that statement was said on the floor, to the Public Service Commission, trying to push them to appoint those positions. What message are we sending, Mr. Speaker? That is impunity. And I'm urging both members of National Assembly and the Senate, Mr. Speaker, if the president cannot take action, will be prescriptive, Mr. Speaker. These times call for action, and they call for action from us, not yesterday but today. If the president does not have the courage, Mr. Speaker, I beseech us as parliamentarians to come up with an amendment and repeal the National Government Coordination Act that created those positions. That's the only time, Mr. Speaker, will be taken serious, Mr. Speaker. If you read the Constitution in Article 152, Mr. Speaker, it gives the presidency the maximum of the number of CSs he can employ at 22, and then a minimum of 14, Mr. Speaker. We have 1,900 doctors. We are not able to take for internship. Do you call it internship, Dr. Kalwale? For internship, Mr. Kalwale, because we are saying our budget cannot support, Mr. Speaker. What we need to do, or what I expect the president to do, he has so many corrupt cabinet secretaries who are giving the country a bad name. Sack them, reduce the cabinet to 14, and the money you save, Mr. Speaker, can be used to employ those doctors for internship. Article 155, Mr. Speaker, does not give the number of principal secretaries that we should have as a country. It has been abused. It has been abused. Do we need, honestly, do we need 51 principal secretaries? No. We don't. We don't. And I'm urging my colleagues, if we agree, Mr. Speaker, we can marshal 2/3. We amend the Constitution, prescribe, put there a maximum of 14 principal secretaries, Mr. Speaker. Because then the youths want to see action from us. Nobody can legislate other than we as senators. Mr. Speaker, why do you create a ministry and then you create 3 departments, Mr. Speaker? I have friends, but I don't have positions to employ all my friends, Mr. Speaker. So we want to urge the president to also talk to his friends and tell them the cake is too small. Not everybody will get a piece, Mr. Speaker. Not everybody will get a piece. Some will get, some will miss, Mr. Speaker. So they cannot put pressure on the president that, you know, I was the candidate in Muhaya, I don't know what, so you must appoint me either ambassador, CS, principal secretary. It cannot work, Mr. Speaker. So if the president does not act within the next 7 days, let us move a constitutional amendment, Mr. Speaker. We be prescriptive. We put the number there, Mr. Speaker. We cap it at 22 maximum, but it can operate with 14. These are extraordinary times. That money we save, Mr. Speaker, we take it and employ JSS teachers, Mr. Speaker. These are the guys who are in the streets demonstrating, Mr. Speaker. We make them also have a bite of the national cake, Mr. Speaker. Instead of saying this cake will only be for principal secretaries, for cabinet secretaries. Cannot be that way, Mr. Speaker. Because this country, we almost lost it, Mr. Speaker. Maybe, we don't know, but maybe we are being given a second chance, Mr. Speaker. And my brother, Senator Cheruiyot, I compare you with Lyndon Johnson, former president of the United States of America. He became the leader of the Senate while very youthful, but he provided leadership. And he was blessed by Almighty God because he ended up becoming a president of the United States of America. The fact that you have the majority does not mean that you exercise tyranny over Kenyans. I'm telling you, my brother, You can have the numbers, but you can still give leadership. You can create a legacy for yourself. In 1936, when Franklin was President of the United States of America, his majority in House of Representatives was 333 members. The opposition had only 89. In the Senate, he had 83. The opposition, Republicans, had only 17. But when he came up with an unpopular legislation to amend the Supreme Court Act to increase the number of judges from 9 to 15, so that he gets himself an opportunity to pick 6, his own party, Democrats, rejected that move. Those were his members of his party. But because they put the interest of the country ahead of the interest of the president, they rejected that move. So we also want to urge our colleagues.
Allow Senator Omogeni 2 minutes to sum up.
Yes. So,
Senator Okongo, just have a seat. Before we started this motion, there's some ground rules that every senator taken to the microphone will be allowed to speak their heart uninterrupted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the point I was making, Mr. Speaker, is that the leadership of the House then was able to put the interests of the country ahead of personal or party interest, Mr. Speaker. We have a bloated cabinet, Mr. Speaker. Not cabinet, we have a bloated government. I want to conclude by urging my colleagues to reconsider an audit of the 2010 Constitution, Mr. Speaker. We have so many constitutional commissions with people serving part-time but doing nothing. Mr. Speaker, how can a body that reviews my salary once a year be working from Monday to Friday? This body called, how? Mr. Speaker, that you sit to review the salary of Senator Omogeni from January to December, Monday to Friday. How can you? Then Mr. Speaker, and I'm rejecting that offer. Then after you have reviewed that for the whole of 1 year, you tell me I've reviewed you with 14,000, which I don't want. Don't want it. We cannot, Mr. Speaker. So we must audit this constitution, Mr. Speaker. Some of these guys who are earning huge amount of salary, Mr. Speaker, we convert them to part-time. That's what the Gen Zs want us to do, Mr. Speaker. If you go to the judiciary, Mr. Speaker, we cannot afford this idea of employing judges left, center, and right, Mr. Speaker. It's not easy to maintain a judge. When you employ a judge, you must give them a car, you must pay them house. We have a judge here, he will tell you. It's not easy, Mr. Speaker. The other day, a motion was taken to the National Assembly. It never came to us. The number of judges of Court of Appeal increased to 70. You have special courts, land and environment. You see they can employ up to 100. Labor, Mr. Speaker, you are a lawyer. A judge who was posted to Kilgoris to deal with land matters stayed there for 3 months. Then they left because there were no cases. Senator Viga, a judge was sent to your county. Esther, she's a Kisi. After 6 months, she went away. There are no cases. Another one went to Malindi. After staying there for 7 months, there were no more cases. How can that be? They made a presentation before us. Senator Cheriot was there. And they proposed that we should...
Senator S.C. Okongo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. And let me just clarify.